Traditional training and advanced lifting techniques can both be effective for building muscle. But is one style of training more effective than the other? And in what situations is each training method more appropriate? First, let's define what each of these training methods are. Traditional resistance training is the way that most people lift weights. We perform a set of multiple reps, then rest for either a pre-prescribed time or until you are ready, and then perform another set. This is repeated until you complete all the prescribed sets for that exercise, and repeated for the following exercises in your workout. Advanced training techniques are a little different. It is difficult to give a specific definition because there are multiple different types of advanced techniques such as drop sets, myo reps, cluster sets, rest pause, supersets, pre-exhaust, and so on. Although they all have somewhat of a common theme, in that they generally involve short rest periods and rely heavily on accumulated fatigue. So, which style of training is better for muscle growth? Well, there isn't really a clear answer to this. Both training styles have been shown to be highly effective for building muscle. And when comparing them, there doesn't seem to be a clear advantage favouring one over the other. For example, this meta-analysis compared the effects of drop set versus traditional training on muscle growth. Of the 5 studies included in the analysis, all of them found significant growth with both training styles. 4 of 5 studies slightly favoured drop sets, with 1 study marginally favouring traditional training. So overall, there was a slight trend favouring drop sets, but it didn't reach statistical significance. However, the issue when comparing advanced lifting techniques to traditional training is that it is tricky to match for the number of sets. And this really comes down to what you want to define as a set. In the case of drop sets, does the drop set count as a standalone set, or is that considered as an extension of the previous set? So this makes it difficult to interpret some studies looking at this concept. For example, this study compared the effects of drop set versus traditional training on muscle growth of the biceps. 9 untrained men performed 2 of either 3 bicep curl training protocols with each arm, 2 to 3 times per week for 8 weeks. First was 3 sets of curls to failure with 80% 1RM. Second was 3 sets of curls to failure with 30% 1RM. And third was 1 set to failure with 80% 1RM, followed by 4 consecutive drop sets with a reduced load. So is this comparing 3 sets to 5 sets, or 3 sets to 1 set? In any case, after 8 weeks, all groups increased biceps cross-sectional area to a similar extent. Some other research that can be helpful in this discussion is the evidence on the effects of rest periods on muscle growth. The overall body of evidence tends to find that significant muscle growth can be achieved with both shorter and longer rest periods. However, resting too short seems to slightly inhibit the hypertrophic stimulus. This was seen in this meta-analysis, which analysed the body of evidence comparing rest periods of different durations. The researchers categorised interventions into rest periods of 1 minute or less, 1 to 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, or longer than 3 minutes. It was found that all rest period categories allowed significant muscle growth to occur. However, short rest periods were slightly inferior compared with intermediate rest. And for reasons that aren't entirely clear at this stage, longer rest periods also seemed to be slightly inferior too. This evidence suggests that traditional training might have a small advantage. Since advanced techniques typically involve very short rest periods, they might be a little less effective on a per set basis compared with traditional training. Although traditional training might be a little more hypertrophic on a per set basis, advanced techniques are probably more time efficient. Since they involve short rest periods, more total work is usually able to be accomplished in the same amount of time. For example, let's say we were to perform 4 sets of an exercise with 2 minutes rest between sets. Assuming each set takes 30 seconds to complete, this would involve 2 minutes of time spent lifting, and 6 minutes of time spent resting. So it would take a total of 8 minutes to complete all 4 sets. Alternatively, if we were to perform 4 sets of myo reps with 30 seconds rest, this would be completed in a shorter time frame. Lifting time would be 2 minutes, and resting time would be a total of 1.5 minutes. So the total duration would only be 3.5 minutes. And if we were to match for time, we would be able to perform 8 myRep sets in roughly the same amount of time as it takes to complete 4 traditional sets. So on one hand, advanced techniques allow us to accumulate more sets in the same amount of time, which is likely beneficial for muscle growth. Although the trade-off is that rest periods are limited, which may be slightly detrimental for muscle growth. A concept which might support the use of advanced techniques is the effective reps model. This model suggests that the reps performed towards the end of a set, which are closer to failure, are more effective on a per rep basis than those performed earlier in the set when further from failure. While this isn't a completely well-supported theory as of yet, some advanced techniques may take advantage of this concept. For example, this study compared the effects of traditional versus pre-exhaust training during leg press training. 31 untrained subjects performed 3 sets of the 45-degree leg press to failure with 75% 1RM 2 times per week for 9 weeks. One group trained with straight sets, while the other group performed 1 set of leg extensions with 20% 1RM immediately before the first set of leg press. As we can see, this affected total training tonnage, with the traditional group performing more total reps on the leg press throughout the study, as we would expect. However, both groups experienced similar increases in quadriceps and glute max hypertrophy despite performance being inhibited. So it may be that some advanced techniques take advantage of the effective reps model by essentially skipping the first half of the set and only performing the hard reps which are closer to failure. This doesn't necessarily mean that greater muscle growth will be achieved, but it could result in similar muscle growth with less total workload. Another potential benefit for advanced techniques might be its effects on joint stress and subsequently training longevity. Since advanced techniques usually promote high acute fatigue, they often inhibit lifting performance on subsequent sets to a greater extent than traditional training. Therefore, lighter loads are often used as a consequence. And as we saw in the previous example on pre-exhaust training, inhibited performance doesn't always mean inhibited muscle growth. Limiting loads can help to alleviate joint stress for the joints involved in the exercise. So advanced techniques could be implemented when recovering from acute or chronic joint pain that is irritated from heavy lifting. And while we don't have longitudinal evidence for this, lifters might experience fewer joint and connective tissue injuries throughout their lifting careers by implementing more advanced lifting techniques. An example of this could be for drop sets. As we have seen, drop sets can produce equal or even superior muscle growth in some cases using lighter loads than traditional training. This is usually a little more forgiving on the joints and may allow a lifter to continue training pain-free for joints which may otherwise be irritated with traditional training. Another factor that may determine what style of training we implement is exercise selection. Certain exercises may not be suitable to be trained with some advanced techniques. More specifically, compound free weight exercises with high systemic demands generally aren't as suitable to be trained with most advanced techniques. For example, supersetting barbell back squats with deadlifts probably isn't going to result in the best outcomes. This is because these exercises have high cardiorespiratory demands, involve a large amount of total musculature, and are highly effortful to perform. So supersetting these two exercises will likely result in high cardiorespiratory fatigue, have carryover fatigue of accessory and stabilizer muscles, and be very effortful to train close to failure. So the target muscles of each lift might not be stressed to the same extent compared with traditional training. But other advanced techniques might be helpful for the same exercises. As we saw in a previous example, pre-fatiguing the quadriceps before a leg press or squat can potentially help us to achieve a good hypertrophic stimulus using lighter loads or by performing fewer total reps. And for most isolation lifts, almost any advanced technique is suitable, as well as traditional training. This is because the target muscle is essentially the only one being significantly stressed. So regardless of how short rest periods are, or what other muscles are trained, the target muscle will almost always be trained close to true muscular failure. And the last consideration determining which training methods might be more appropriate is training status. Beginners might be a little more well suited to traditional training for 2 primary reasons. first is that beginners might simply get a little confused and overwhelmed at the concept of these advanced lifting techniques. Beginners should just focus on keeping their training routine simple and focus on being consistent. And it's not like they are going to miss out on any potential gains, since traditional training is generally equally as effective as advanced techniques. And second is that beginners are still learning the technique of how to perform each exercise. So practicing more reps in a low fatigue state is probably going to be better for initially learning the movements. Because advanced techniques often rely on high acute fatigue, it can be more difficult to hold strict form under a high fatigue state. Whereas for more advanced lifters, both traditional and advanced techniques are usually suitable, so one might be chosen over the other based on the previously discussed factors. To summarize, let's establish some practical recommendations. Overall, both traditional training and advanced techniques can be highly effective for building muscle. However, we might decide to implement one training method over the other in certain situations. Some exercises or workouts may be better suited to traditional training, while advanced techniques might have an advantage for others. Traditional training may produce a little more muscle growth on a per set basis due to longer rest periods. It is also usually more suitable for free weight compound lifts, which have higher global fatigue costs. And for beginners, traditional training is usually more appropriate compared with advanced techniques. Although advanced techniques offer some unique advantages too. They are usually a more time-efficient way to train compared with traditional training due to shorter rest periods. And they are usually a little less stressful on the joints and connective tissue due to lighter loads being used. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Check out flowhighperformance.com for online coaching, training templates, ebooks, and more.